A study conducted by Northwestern University wanted to determine how well people could predict the amount of pain that would be associated by being in a very cold room for 5 hours. So they took half of the group and they stuck their arms into a bucket of ice water. They took the other half of the group and they stuck their arms into a bucket of warm water. And then they asked them to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. How painful do you think being in a cold room would be? Which one do you think said it would be more painful? That's right, the people who had their arms in the bucket of ice water. Now, interestingly enough, then they went back to that same group, and 10 minutes after no longer having their arm in the bucket of ice water, they asked them to rate the experience again. And guess what they said? The results ended up being the same as the people who had their arms in the bucket of warm water. Once they were no longer in the scenario, they could not relate, they could not have the same perspective as the people who actually were still making that recommendation with their arm in the water. Pretty interesting, right? So, they tell a story in the book, Give and Take, about an oncologist who was looking over a man with cancer who didn't have many days to live, and the oncologist didn't want to give up hope. So the oncologist really wanted to do a spinal tap. The old man was pained, he was feeble, he was having a tough time, and the family protested, the patient protested, but the oncologist pushed for it and pushed for it and pushed for it and said, I know what's best, I want to make your husband better, like, we want this man to survive. So the family finally consented, the man had the spinal tap. The spinal tap caused such pain that the man actually ended up going into, like having a severe headache and going into a coma. And in the story, in the book, they actually say that, hey, really, the only way for you to be able to understand what the patient is going through is to have a dialogue with that patient about what their wishes are and what their desires are. We talked a little bit about this in the 66-day habit challenge, where we were talking about making sure that you diagnose before you prescribe. Then they told a story about a gift-giving study. Tons of great stories in this book. And in the story, they had people create a registry and then other people give a gift. And the people that were giving the gift were allowed to look at the registry and either pick something from the registry or pick something not from the registry that they thought that the receiver would really love. They just may not have known existed based off of the items that they selected for the registry. And wouldn't you know that the receiver tended to be disappointed if they didn't get something from the registry, whereas the sender tended to feel as if they were doing something amazing by sending them something that took more thought and more personal reflection. So what is all this telling us? It's telling us that people appreciate it more when we take a walk in their shoes, when we take a pause to figure out what their perspective is. And when we take that pause, we do much better at collaborating and much better at coming to a unified decision when we are taking that time to figure out where they're coming from. So very early in my career, I decided it would be a great incentive back in the Chuck E. Cheese days. If I threw a pizza party and dressed up as Chuck E. Cheese myself, which is usually the job that most people in the store didn't want to do, and do the last live show of the week every single week. I thought that would be a great way to stay, walking in my team's shoes. And they loved it, they enjoyed it. As I moved along and moved into retail and got into upper management, I always said, I'm never gonna forget what it's like to be in the shoes of the people that work for me. We went off to a conference getting ready for the holidays one year, and there was a contest like who can scan in the most items and who could take the most returns and do all of this in what amount of time. And I was like, I ran the #1 store in the country before I was the district manager. I got this. I'm gonna crush all my managers and show them what's what. I lost miserably. The system had changed. I was not practiced. I was not walking in their shoes anymore. And I looked back at the Chuck E. Cheese days and I said, look, I'm not taking the time each week to actually step out of my role and into their role and understand where they're coming from. I made it a point at that point in time to always walk a mile in my people's shoes. We actually hold a weekly event in my teams where the manager goes and works the person's positions each week just to understand what it is that they are doing and to put themselves in their shoes, motivate the employee, have some fun, have a little sales contest, and see who can beat the boss. Walk a mile in your people's shoes. Get their perspective. Walk a mile in your wife's shoes, your husband's shoes, your children's shoes. Remember what it was like. Take that trip back to when you were them, and remember, be empathetic, be sympathetic. Like, have an open dialogue about where they are coming from, and I guarantee that you'll be able to collaborate on the problem at hand much better. Have a great day, guys.